Let us pray. Gracious and eternal God, we are here this morning to join in this worship service, to sing your songs, to pray unto you for help, to read your word, to join in corporate worship with one another. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Go on. As I think about that, it brings a great meaning to me. As I listened and as I read the scriptures, where God said unto Moses, "Speak to the people." Why are you whining, Moses? Speak to the people and tell them to go forward. Go on. That's a great message, to go on, have faith. You know, sometimes we do become discouraged, and we want to give up. The way seems hard. But if we listen to that still small voice saying unto us, "Go on." I happen to be a descendant of slaves. My great-grandparents were slaves. My grandparents were slaves. They fought the great fight. They struggled in Egypt's land. But by the grace of God, they made it. Though when they were set free, they were given nothing for their labor. They were turned loose. Many of them wandered into the woods, I would say into the wilderness. I think of my great-grandmother, Sina, who was one of two slave girls brought from Roanoke, Virginia, back to South Carolina by her new slave master. And he had, at the age of 12, he had children by the two of them. My grandmother had a brother. And they were small children. The master got killed in a war between the states. And she had to wander into the wilderness looking, eating whatever she could get with the two little kids, and making a shelter until she survived. And she did meet someone who was also set free. He was a slave. They jumped a broom, as it was customary in those days. The slaves got married, and they became husband and wife. That was my maternal grandmother on my father's side. My maternal grandfather Stalin Glenn, who was a handyman on Mr. Glenn's plantation. He said he was a smart boy. He was determined, he worked hard, he wanted his freedom. And one day he was set free, he and his wife, Liza. They had 3 kids. They left the plantation. They wandered in the wilderness until they found something they had heard of a man, a minister, who had come from the north. He happened to have been a Presbyterian, though they were Methodists, but my great-grandfather was interested in education for his children. They moved close as they could to the school that was organized by the Reverend Richardson in Winnsboro, South Carolina. He sent his children to that grade school. My grandfather, my great-grandfather, my grandfather, they all helped to build a new church, which stands today, the Shiloh Presbyterian Church, which has produced many outstanding leaders in this country. My grandfather became the first black teacher in Fairfield County, South Carolina. Unfortunately, he died at the age of 43 from tuberculosis. He left behind his pregnant wife and 8 children. He was buying land, and she was determined to keep the children together. The family wanted to divide them up, but she said no. She kept them together. My father was 7 years old. He had to quit school, though he was only going to school because the public school was only open 4 months a year. When my grandfather was teaching, he taught at 2 schools. Each one was for 4 months a year. But after he died, it was a hard time for the children. Some of the older ones had gone to the graded school of Presbyterians. But the younger ones had to drop out of school. My grandfather finished the 3rd grade. One thing I can say about him, he could count faster in his head than I could count on paper. He could read. He read his newspaper, he read his Bible. All of my great-grandparents and great-grandparents, they owned land. And I might say that my grandmother and Mary, who struggled with her kids, they finally, though they lost the land that they were buying, they bought more land. And a house, bought 50 acres with a nice 2-story house on it. I don't know how they did it, but they did. And all the children, all 9 of them, bought land. They were determined to move forward.